All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Young, and I will be your host today on our first webinar covering the 2014 Transportation Site Impact Handbook. This is an update to the 2010 version of the Transportation Impact Handbook. Many of you know that in 2010 and 2011 there were many changes to the growth management laws, rendering much of the Impact Handbook a bit out of date. Since 2011, we have been updating the handbook, and we would like to introduce the handbook and the major changes with you today. Today, we have with us many of the people who helped rewrite the handbook. They are here today to go over the major changes and also to answer your questions if possible. We have Gary Sokolow from the Systems Planning Office, myself, Andrew Young, Janine Fear from CDM Smith, and Martin Guttenplan from CDM Smith. Though we all do not have formal speaking parts, all of us here have experience in different aspects of impact analyses, level of service calculations, growth management, and modeling. So as you ask questions, we are all available to help with our specific knowledge. This is a quick overview of a fairly thick document. We will concentrate on what is new and get you familiar with the layout of the handbook. Since this is just an overview, we plan to have future webinars and live training on the use of the handbook, and we will tell you how to sign up and keep current with the upcoming webinars and live training on the Transportation Site Impact Handbook. Some of the common questions we receive are getting copies of the presentation. We will send out a copy of the presentation in about a day or two. There will be 1.5 CM credits available, as well as 1.5 PDH credits. And we are also recording this webinar, and we'll have it posted to our training website. So if you want to go back and listen to it again, you will have that option. Since this is a webinar, you will be muted. However, you can ask your questions in a question tab dialog box, as I will demonstrate shortly. Please ask your questions as they come up, and we will try to get to them as quickly as possible. I am sure there will be questions that we can't answer immediately, or questions of a philosophical nature. These may have to be discussed at a later time, or we will send our answers to you via email.
Andrew, one moment. My PowerPoint presentation crashed. I'm going to load it again.
Sorry for the delay, folks. We're in the process of getting our PowerPoint back up and running. I'm going to keep going through how we call participate today. By clicking the orange arrow, you can open and close your control panel. From the View menu, you can also set the control panel not to auto-hide when inactive if you prefer to keep it always open. The audio pane provides audio information. If the organizer has given attendees by default, you have joined the webinar via the mic and speakers. Click Audio Setup to select your computer speaker or headset devices. If you prefer, you can join with audio via the telephone by selecting Use Telephone, and the dial-in information will be displayed, including an audio pin. If you'd like to ask any questions of today's presenters over the phone, you must enter your audio pin in order to have your line unmuted. If you have a question, you can send them through the questions pane. Simply type in your question and click Send. You may also raise your hand if you have a question. If you have joined us with the capability of using your microphone, we will then unmute you so you can ask a question that everyone can hear. We will also be able to take questions and answers throughout today's webinar. All right, so I already covered all this. Most of you all should be pretty familiar with this anyway. All right, Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Gary Sokolow. I've been involved in the writing and rewriting of this handbook since 1997. There's been a lot of changes, however, but many of the principles of site impact have not changed, and that's the good news. We have changed the name of the handbook this time by adding the word site to it, and if I could have the keyboard and mouse control.
You should have it now, Gary.
Okay, good. All right. Okay. It's not really, okay, now I have controls. It's just taking some time. I apologize. Okay, we added the word site to clarify what kind of impact handbook it is. So one of the nice things that has not changed is that we have a website where you can get the latest versions, any changes and additions that we make along the way. It's still called FDOT, Transportation. Impact Handbook. It's FDOT Transportation Impact Handbook. And pretty soon you will see an actual picture. Okay, when you go there and you download the handbook in PDF and you open it up, you'll see that there are bookmarks on the left-hand side to make it easier for you to get to where you want to go. You can see here, in addition to adding the word site, we have also added the subtitle, Estimating the Transportation Impacts of Growth. Okay, before we get much further into this, I'd like to know something about the people out here, and so I'm going to have a poll, and I'm going to ask you what best describes the kind of workplace that you're in. And in a moment you will see that poll, and you'll have an opportunity to answer. This is good. I appreciate everybody who is working on this, and with almost 80% of the people already answering, I'm going to close this, and I'm going to share it with you so you'll get to see. Look at that. So it's mostly consultants and local governments here, and really appreciate all the interest in this, because we have not had any training, live training, nor any webinar training on any of our handbooks or on growth management since about 2007, 2008. So I do appreciate that. Now I'm going to hide that and continue on. DOT is responsible for reviewing and providing comments on local government comprehensive plans and plan amendments, as well as development orders as they relate to the transportation impacts on state and regional multimodal facilities. However, you will find with this webinar that DOT's roles and responsibilities have changed quite a bit since 2008 and 2011, and we'll go over that. In this webinar, you'll see that. I have another poll for you. We had the previous version, the 2010 version, which we did a number of webinars back 2010-2011. I'd like to know if any of you out there had ever used that. So. Right. It looks to me like I'm going to close this. I'm going to show you. It's a 50-50. And I guess that's what happens when you don't update your handbook for a number of years. A lot of people enter the profession and may not be aware of it, so I'm really glad that you're here learning about the 2014 version, which I do at this point want to say that if all we were going to talk about was the 214 version, I could say you could just read the book. But what we want to do also is to keep you updated with the latest that is happening in the field of site impact analysis, which we will try to do on the website, and we will try to do with these webinars also. I'm going to hide the poll and okay. So why do we even do transportation impact analysis? Well, first of all, we want to protect the operation safety of the transportation system, and we want to minimize any of the bad impacts that could happen both on the regional and local transportation networks. So what we try to do with this handbook is that we try to guide our FDOT staff in reviewing local government comprehensive plans, developments of regional impact, and certain other land use changes. And I apologize for the alphabet soup there, but anytime that we go over something like that, you don't know what the acronym is, just ask us a question. But in addition to just dealing with guidance for DOT staff, this handbook also offers some guidance to the development community and to our local government colleagues on what we think is the proper way to analyze transportation impacts of new growth. Got another poll for you here. I'm going to go back one slide and point out something that I didn't point out before. Occasionally you'll see this page curl over on the bottom right. And what that says throughout our presentation, that this corresponds to page 17 in the PDF version of the handbook, or if you've printed it out. In the future, if you don't have it now, you might want to have it printed out and ready to go to. So there you go. So I'm going to ask you whether you have a copy handy right now. And so that possible, yes, I have a printed copy next to me. Yes, I have the PDF version on a screen. And no. All right. I'm going to close the poll because it's very clear what we have, and I'm going to share it. And what we have out there is people like myself who go, why do I need the handbook? I'm at the webinar. I'll learn everything. Well, that's the way I might try to deal with it. But actually, if you have a printed copy or an electronic version on your screen, you will get more out of these future webinars on this. And I guess this is a good time to say, and Andrew Young mentioned it earlier, you will get a copy of this presentation in a day or two, and I'll have all the live links. We will be sending you an update email based sometimes on the questions that we get. If we can answer some of those questions and provide more information through a link, we'll have that in the email that we send you the presentation. Okay, I'm going to hide that and go back to the presentation. So what we're going to cover today is really quick. As Andrew mentioned, it's a thick document. We don't have much time, but we're going to have an entire series of webinars on this. So today we're just going to focus on what's new, and we're going to focus on how the actual handbook is organized. These are the chapters in the handbook, and we have the introduction, which I'm kind of going over right now. Chapter 2 is the largest. It's the transportation impact process. We had a question earlier about what was an LGCP, and that is a local government comprehensive plan, and that's a Florida term that is passed around a lot, the same as DRI, or Developments of Regional Impact. And Chapter 5 is about mitigation. It's what do we do when we find out what impacts we expect. There are resource guides throughout this handbook, and they've been one of the most popular features. By using internet links, you will be able to find the most up-to-date information, even if the printed version of this handbook becomes out of date. And you know, today things become out of date almost immediately, but we've really tried to keep live links in there, such as this one with the Florida rules. The other feature, which is really popular in the last one, was checklists that really help in the review and making sure whether, if you're doing the actual analysis, whether you have caught everything that's applicable to the study that you're doing. Over the years, we've created examples and collected samples of work done for traffic impact analysis, and we put a number of these in the appendices of the handbook. Again, you'll see a generous use of hyperlinks to make your job easier. So with this, Chapter 2, which is the largest of the chapters and probably the one that we're going to spend the most time over the next 6 months or so, is on the technical side of impact analysis. We cover a lot of material from guidance on trip generation to how to blend large-scale regional models and smaller-scale analyses methods to give you the best estimate of future traffic conditions. As we said earlier, Chapter 2 is still the largest chapter since it's the most closely related to our role as a transportation agency. As mentioned before, the good news is much of the basic guidance is the same as it was in 2010. However, philosophies, calculation techniques, and improvements to our models have to be reflected in our chapters and in our training. And as many of you know, there has been some change in philosophies, in trip generation, change of philosophies. We have complete streets is become a lot more active. The role of infill development and how much impact infill development has is still a very active philosophical discussion that is going on in the professional field. What's new in Chapter 2? I'm not going to read everything on this slide because you can read it, but continuing with our efforts in 2010, we hope that this new edition is even more multimodal and less automobile-centric. Since 2010, we've learned a lot more about what we call trip internalization and trip generation, and we will go into that in future webinars. We have a brand new LOS handbook, or as of 2013, it's still pretty new, and we have a new feature which has become standard in the process is a peaking factor called K. It's a proportion of the day's traffic or annual average daily traffic that makes up the peak hour. We have a standardized version of that now to make it easier. We've also moved away from the a standard four-step process as the basis for the entire Chapter 2 like we did in the past, because we understand that the four-step process that is used in large regional scale models sometimes in the past has favored the automobile mode over other modes. We've provided links to some of the most important transit guidance provided by DOT as well as national sources. These will be helpful in the move away from a completely auto-centric analysis to one where transit options are part of the answers to providing better travel opportunities to the public. We are really excited to offer links to 2 authoritative guides on the subjects of transit best practices and mobility planning review. The Center for Urban Transportation Research has done both of these reports and has done a series of webinars around the state over the last year, and by a show of hands, because you can raise your hand, if you could raise your hand if you have either heard or been to one of these live training sessions. Okay. All right. I'm glad to see somebody. How many people were not aware of these documents? If you would raise your hand. Well, then this is going to be really good, because these documents are going to help guide a lot of what we do in systems planning at Florida DOT as we work with our local government partners. So thank you for participating in that. And we will make sure you get the links to these publications as well as training, and we'll get into that later on how you can be sure that you will be notified of all the training. In 2013, DOT Planning produced the latest in a series of quality level of service handbooks. We have numerous improvements and changes that have been made. I talked earlier about what they call the standard K. Those of you that are familiar with transportation analysis know that a lot of time was spent on determining this peaking factor, but now after thousands of hours of study, we have an easy to follow chart that is quite good for estimating peak hour traffic. We decided to add more practical advice this time, and we found that due to an active community on the blogosphere, as well as active transportation planner and traffic engineering forums, that we could find some really cool stuff. What you see here is a screenshot that I stole from my favorite traffic engineering blog called Mike on Traffic, and almost every week he has an interesting article on how to make our jobs better and easier, and this one is regarding why that even though you use aerials and Google Earth and Google Street View, why you still need to actually go on site and look at it. As much as we love to give you free guidance, occasionally we can't. The Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE, has put out a trip generation manual. This is the 9th edition, and we do have a link, but we can't give you the link to a free document, but we'll take you to the ITE store where you can lose about $600. So just letting you know. Something new for us at DOT after a really long dry spell since the 1970s, we're now actively involved in original trip generation research. Since 2010, we've looked at a number of emerging land uses. We have looked at convenience markets with gas pumps, and as many of you probably know, the entire industry of convenience markets has changed to a much larger store and more fueling positions than ever. During the economic downturn, one of the rising stars, and that's economically speaking, were those establishments known as small box stores, as you see here, the Dollar Generals and Family Dollar. And we have studied these and have the most studies of anybody in the country on what now ITE, or the Institute of Transportation Engineers, calls variety stores. So coming soon to a webinar will be a summary of these studies and recommendations on how to treat specific general trip generation characteristics of these land uses in Florida. One of the changes that was added to this handbook since 2010 is that we're discussing growth rates that might not always be going up. In the past, we always considered growth to be a constant. However, in the past few years, we've seen changes in these growth rates. This is a screen capture of a Federal Highway report on growth rates that we did in 2012, when you'll find this one in the handbook. But things have changed even since then, so I went back to Federal Highway and took a look at the 2014 version of this, and you'll see there is a slight uptick. This is for the nation, and we keep this in mind as we go through. They're not easy answers like we used to say, like, oh, it's always 2% or more a year. You understand that this is a controversial concept, and you will be finding some people that are saying that the amount of trips are going down, and we don't give a one-size-fit-all on this controversy, but we emphasize a data-based approach, okay? You should always, when dealing with any kind of rate of some kind, be careful about the use of rates, because you might end up looking and feeling like I have a number of times in my career doing something like this. One important development since the last Impact Handbook is a completion of an NCHRP, that's the National Cooperative Highway Research Program. And it's a report on enhancing internal trip capture estimations for mixed-use developments, or trip internalization. And we will provide you links to this document. It's free, plus free spreadsheets that do the calculations for you. In addition to the work done at the national level by NCHRP, the Center for Urban Transportation Research, or CUTR, has completed a report on 4 mixed-use developments within Florida. And, you know, some of them are the neo-traditional type, some are the smart growth type, transit-oriented developments, and as you can see down here, we looked at mixed-use developments that are extremely standard suburban. So with this, I would like to offer up some time for questions? Do we have questions out there? I see. Okay. And if not, really keep those questions coming. You can ask anytime by using the question panel. Okay. With that, I'm going to attempt to go. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to hand this presentation over now to Janine Fear of CDM Smith. Janine was one of our major editors of chapters 3 through 5 of this handbook. These chapters are mostly concerning more of the land use growth management aspects of impact analysis. So Janine, thank you, and take over.
Thank you, Gary. Hello. Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be presenting to you guys a very brief summary of Chapter 3, focusing on the impact of legislative changes that have happened since the 2010 edition of this handbook. Now, when you go through this handbook, you'll notice that this chapter is broken down into 4 sections that are shown on the screen for you. Major changes which impact growth management and transportation planning that are identified within this handbook came from, but are not limited to, the passage of House Bills 7207 and 319, as well as the repeal of Rules 9J5, 9J11, and 1494 of the Florida Administrative Code. House Bill 7207 significantly impacted Chapter 163, Part 2, Florida Statutes, which governs the statewide implementation of growth management. Impacts include the elimination of mandatory statewide concurrency for transportation, school, and recreational areas, making them now optional for local governments. Financial feasibility of the 5-year capital improvement schedule and associated plans was also removed as a statewide requirement, as well as requiring that comprehensive plan and plan amendments be consistent with the goals and objectives of the state comprehensive plan. Requirements of local governments to include policies for energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions were also removed from statute. House Bill 7207 also revised the Evaluation and Appraisal Review, or EAR, process for comprehensive plans, with revisions not only to scheduling for when each local government in the state will assess their comprehensive plans, but also how they will assess and notify the state in regards to submitting an EAR sufficiency letter and associated comprehensive plan amendments if applicable. Let's see, there's a question right here. I don't know if this I'm going to leave the question I see right now for at the end to answer in regards to the study area. Yeah, I will leave that till the end.
And the same can be said for we have a question on multi-use impact, and we'll get to that later.
Okay. Moving on. For DOT staff, the revisions that were seen in the legislative update since 2011 are reflected in the most current version of the Comprehensive Plan Review Procedure. Now, in addition to the changes that have just been identified, other changes include revisions to the state review process for comprehensive plans and plan amendments, repeal of statutory authority regarding designation of transportation concurrency exception areas, transportation concurrency management areas, and multimodal transportation districts, Other changes include a redefining of the roles of the State Land Planning Agency and other state agencies such as FDOT, and revisions to the sector plan and rural land stewardship area programs. I think there were supposed to be images. There we go. Originally, the State Land Planning Agency before December 2011 was known as Department of Community Affairs. Since this time, these functions have moved to the Department of Economic Opportunity, or DEO, for the purposes of growth management. DEO is now alternately known as the State Land Planning Agency. In regards to the change in state review process as identified earlier, the original process for comprehensive plan review was the regular comprehensive plan amendment review process that included all state agency comments and review, and a small-scale comprehensive plan process for 10-acre or less future land use map amendments. Although the small-scale amendment process is still active, the regular comprehensive plan review process was split into two processes, one called the expedited and the other the state coordinated. And when we do a webinar on Chapter 3 and going over it in detail, we'll talk more about these two processes. Now, before I continue, I'd like to go back a bit and take a moment to ensure everyone understands what occurred with concurrency, specifically transportation concurrency. Even though it is now optional, a significant number of local governments, both county and municipal, still implement transportation concurrency. Guidance for those local governments that are still implementing transportation concurrency can be found under Section 163-3180 of the Florida statute. During the time concurrency was being revised as state law, Rules 9J5 and 9J11, which provided additional guidance and requirements regarding growth management, were repealed with portions of these rules incorporated into Chapter 163, Part 2, particularly in Sections 163, 3177, 3184, and 3187. Another administrative rule which was repealed during this time was Rule 1494. Rule 1494 contains statewide minimum level service standards on the state roadway system and also provided for enforcement authority to apply those standards. With the repeal of Rule 1494, the standards are now only advisory and are not enforceable by the DOT. Now, all of these changes also impacted the roles of the state agencies in the comprehensive plan process, including the FDOT. Now, DEO is responsible for the overall state review process and is the agency with statutory authority to challenge whether plan amendments are consistent or not consistent with state law. Similar to pre-2011 times, state agencies like FDOT have the ability to coordinate with DEO on plan amendments as to whether or not they impact important state resources or facilities. So, comments and recommendations from FDOT on amendments that must focus on transportation resources and facilities that are of state importance. Now, as you look at the slide, you may ask yourself, so what is an important state facility? Although we do not have time to talk about this topic today, it's important to note that the House Bill 7207 never defined what an important state facility was in statute, and left it up to the state agencies that have jurisdiction over those resources like DOT to identify. To continue on, even though the guidance for transportation concurrency alternatives that are listed above here on this slide were removed from the statute. Local governments have and may still want to continue the use of these concurrency alternatives within their jurisdictions. An additional alternative for transportation efficiencies is now available for local governments to use and was included into the statute in House Bill 7207. We will talk about that in a little bit more detail in Chapter 5. Now, moving on to the last but equally as important changes to growth management since the 2010 update to the Handbook, we shall look at the changes that impact the sector plan and rural land stewardship area programs. As you see on the slide before you, there are summaries of the changes that occur to these two programs, which include changes to their designation criteria and process, development of these plans, and the interaction of these plans with state agencies. First, let's talk about the Rural Land Stewardship Area Program, or RLSA. Changes from House Bill 7207 gave this program its own statute, Section 163-3248, to govern the implementation of the program. Eligible areas for this program must be at least 10,000 acres or more and outside of municipalities and or established urban service areas for the program to be implemented. In addition, changes to the initiation process for an RLSA now begins as a request from local landowners to the local government, who can then designate the areas under what is called a RLSA overlay. And that is done through a comprehensive plan amendment. This comprehensive plan amendment is one of the few types of comprehensive plan amendments that have to go through the state coordinated review process. Now, another program that saw many revisions from House Bill 7207 was the Sector Plan Program. Now, these days, you may have been hearing a lot about sector plans in the news, particularly Sugar Hill and Southwest Hendry in Henry County, Bay Walton in the Panhandle, Wellness Way in Lake County, Division Alachua, also known as Plum Creek in Alachua County, and Deseret, also known as North Ranch in Osceola County. Revisions to the Sector Plan Program were intended to make this program an alternative to the DRI program. To be eligible, an area must be at least 15,000 acres. Sector plans can be designated in two ways. One is through what's called a regular process, in which the sector plan is created to be a sector plan at onset. Another way of designation is called flume conversion, or future land use map conversion. A conversion of a future land use map amendment that was adopted on or before July 1, 2011, that also is consistent with the criteria for designation for a sector plan can be made into a sector plan with an agreement with DEO. Now, on this slide right here is an example of a framework map from what is called a long-term master plan, which is a portion of the Bay Walton sector plan created by the St. Joe Company. The Bay Walton sector plan is an extension of an existing West Bay sector plan, and it's considered one of the largest sector plans in Florida at over 110,000 acres. And speaking of a long-term master plan, sector plans consist of two components, a long-term master plan, or LTMP, and a detailed specific area plan, or a DSAP. Development of these components may include formal scoping meetings or informal workshops. The long-term master plan, or LTMP, provides the overarching framework and guidance for the sector plan, and is adopted as a comprehensive plan amendment through the state coordinated review process. DSAPs are used to implement the long-term master plan in pieces of 1,000 acres or more. Unlike the long-term master plan, the DSAPs are adopted by local development order. Only DEO has the ability to review a DSAP and challenge a DSAP if it is not consistent with a long-term master plan that has been adopted for the sector plan into a comprehensive plan. Now, in accordance to all the changes that I just discussed for this chapter, we revised the resource guides at the end of the chapter to help you with your review of comprehensive plan amendments and additional resources that you might need. The revised resource guides are shown on the screen before you. And on this next slide is an example of one of the resource guides that are available for your use for Chapter 3. And it's the Local Government Comprehensive Plan Future Land Use Map Amendment Review Checklist. And that is all I had to speak with you about today. Are there any questions?
Janine?
Yes.
Hey, this is Gary, and we've had a few questions related to Chapter 2, and if you don't mind, I'd like to answer some of them, or at least touch on them. The one question that I got on multi-use developments is how can you account for developments that will grow over time and in fact maybe early in their process be mostly residential? And my answer to that was that is the biggest question of all in internal capture. When there is a development that starts out, especially early in its phases. Let's just take, for instance, a new town. At the beginning, there will be a lot of people that will be commuting to close by cities. As the area develops, hopefully there'll be more office and commercial opportunities on site, but that usually doesn't come until there are enough people living there. So that happens first. So what we have done in the past is say, there will be internal capture, we understand that, but you should be doing that by phase based on the variety of land uses and the variety of income groups that live in that development. Then, another question is how far should a study area be extended? Now, in the handbook, we do go over different methods that are used, but without going into excruciating detail. This depends on the local government. Some of the local governments extend their study area to a certain percentage of what is known as the maximum service volume of the level of service standard of that road. So if the highest or the lowest level of standard that's good for that road is E and it's 1,000, then sometimes they'll say if it's 5% or 10% of that, it should be studied. Some governments use a standard distance based on the size of the development. But here in Florida, Florida DOT staff has to abide by the local government process, and the local governments are the ones that choose that. All right. Those are two questions that we got. It's a really good question here. Has there been talk about incorporating of quantitative safety analysis like those of the Highway Safety Manual? And the answer is there have been discussions about this. As I said earlier in the presentation, philosophies are changing dramatically since the 1960s and the 1970s. It has been the practice in the past. It's been very auto-centric. You plan, we see that the model comes out with 40,000 vehicles a day, so obviously you need six lanes. And that is not necessarily the answer every time. Yes, safety is a primary concern, and with something like the Highway Safety Manual, and I hope some of you are familiar with that, it is a national manual that has gathered data nationally that has statistically valid factors for figuring out which transportation improvements will lead to less crashes. And so the short answer is you're going to see more of this, David. You're going to see more incorporation, and I hope so, of safety rather than the term that a lot of people use is mobility, but sometimes I think the word speed is probably better. Okay, so with that, we'll have more questions as we go, and I will stop talking.
All right, well, I guess we'll be moving on to Chapter 4 and give Martin Guttenplan a go.
Thank you, Janine.
Martin?
Okay. Hopefully I've got control of the presentation at this point. This chapter on DRIs is going to be it's an interesting situation because of so many of the changes in legislation have been essentially to encourage use of other tools rather than DRIs. But we'll go through what's in the handbook, and we'll go through some of the changes. We're not going to actually spend much time on the DRI methodology because that itself has not changed much. But the handbook has a great deal of information there from the years of when DRIs were a very large portion of the development in the state. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so the definition for DRIs is here. Any development, because of its character, magnitude, etc., would have a substantial effect on health, safety, or welfare of citizens in more than one county. And what's different now is let's say read the asterisk. Exceptions and conditions apply, and that's as I say, it really affects what's considered a DRI, what needs to go through DRI review in the state. Just an example of one DRI that's active, and that's the Foley DRI in Taylor County and surrounding counties. It just shows you the immense size of this development. But so since the 2010 update, there have been many new exemptions, revisions of thresholds, revisions of substantial deviation, built-out criteria, and even more so, extensions of deadlines regarding DRIs. Just a few of the thresholds where things have been changed are multi-screen movie theaters, industrial plants, warehousing, hotel, motel, all all have been removed from the review process. And solid mineral mines. When it comes to substantial deviation, a lot of these thresholds were increased. So in terms of parking spaces, from 10 to 15% for attraction and recreation, and the list kind of goes on. So there also, in 2012, in 380.06.119E2K, there was an addition to the list of changes that are not substantial deviations, and states that changes which don't increase external peak hour trips and don't reduce open space areas are not substantial deviations. Anyway, the short answer is, well, we'll keep going. You'll see it. As you see, this is the list of DULA areas, dense urban land areas, and it just goes on and on. Basically, if you have a dense urban land area municipality, it no longer needs to go through the DRI review. Or if you have an urban service area of a DULA county, or DULA counties without urban service areas. So if you're in that urban setting, most likely you're not going to have a DRI there. This just shows a map of Manatee County showing the urban service area there. In terms of non-DULA local government exemptions, if you have urban infill, community redevelopment, downtown revitalization, urban service area, as you can see, basically, if it's urban, most likely there's a DRI exemption that it falls under. So where does that leave us? Oh, these are other DRI exemptions, rural land stewardship areas, the DSAPs that we mentioned, Janine mentioned, and any development in airport and campus master plans. So basically what's happening, if you have large development, the idea is making it, provides an incentive to go to some sort of a sector plan or convert to a sector plan if you have a large enough area. So as we said earlier, the DRI process is essentially the same. Where there is some activity in regards to DRIs are on the notice of proposed changes. It requires formal determination from DEO, the RPC, and local government as to what level of further review will be required. The handbook contains a summary table of thresholds that trigger NOPCs, and for FDOT's portion, they should be reviewing these notices of proposed changes to assess potential transportation-related impacts. Other types of review, here's an example of I think this one was from Pasco County DRI. And you can, if you look at the figure, you can see how the build-out times were changed, the reduction in units. So now it requires these changes, get into if your community college, for instance, is going up by 900 students, such as in this phase 3, then you're talking about a different phase. We talked we mentioned biennial reports and monitoring and modeling studies, and this is one of the tools that is used to determine when there is trouble, or a lot of times these large developments are based on certain assumptions, and if those assumptions don't come to pass, then there needs to be some re-review. And in this case, in Celebration, they were subject to monitoring and modeling studies, and then that's compared to what's in other words, we're looking at what were actual counts here and what was projected by ITE. Same thing here, actual counts versus what was projected. Then there was also the calculated peak hour capture, internal capture, and then what was also calculated. So by monitoring along the way, you can see whether or not you're in keeping with what was originally proposed. And again, just this is the chapter that has the most checklists. They're all there. Gary, why don't you take us through a poll to see, just among our listeners, who really has active DRIs in their area.
All right, thank you. And I will do that in a moment. The question that we have is, do you currently have a DRI, a current or active DRI in your area? You'll see that it's more than yes or no. It's yes, but dealing with time extensions and exemptions. No, but I heard something's going to start soon, or just absolutely no. Yeah, this is a difficult question. It's taking a while for people to answer. All right. I'm going to close the poll, and I'm going to share it with you. So it looks like quite a few of you said yes, that you are dealing with developments of regional impact, and about the same amount of you said no, but frankly I'm surprised that there are that many that said yes. And so the death of developments of regional impact has been highly exaggerated, maybe. But we shall see. Thank you for answering that. I'm going to hide this now, and then we go back to the presentation. And Martin, take it over.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Perhaps there'll be a little time at the end to engage in a little discussion about what's going on with developments of regional impact. The last chapter of the handbook is devoted to mitigation. And one of the overarching themes of that chapter is that there before, where mitigating for the impact of development used to only be considered, adding lanes or turn signals or turn lanes, things like that. Now we're looking at 3 different categories of mitigation strategies. One would be increasing the efficiency of the system. Another one would be increasing modal options such as transit, bicycling, and walking. And then lastly, if there's no other real solution, it gets into adding capacity. Janine mentioned earlier that we've got both the expedited and the state coordinated review process. The main thing here is both processes will identify the impacts and mitigation measures. And those provisions for mitigating the impacts are located in 163.3177 and 163.3180. And again, the department is limited to comments on proposed plan amendments that specifically state how the amendment will adversely impact important state resources and facilities, and then also identify the measures that local governments can take to eliminate, reduce, or mitigate for those impacts. So it's a slight refocusing. This slide's just a little more visual about some of the mitigation strategies other than just adding lanes. Congestion management processes, access management plans, increasing network connectivity. Those are all tools on the table that can be recommended. And when it comes to working out these mitigation agreements, this is really extremely important. Well, I'm just stating the obvious, but if you miss out on the opportunity to produce mitigation of these impacts, you'll have long-term effects. So some of the changes since 2010 affecting mitigation: proportionate fair share, which used to be for sub-DRI development, now has been eliminated, but it's basically been revised so that if you have transportation concurrency, any development must be offered the option of using proportionate share mitigation using the formula in the DRI legislation. However, as we'll talk about more, there are some real changes on how proportionate share is calculated, and that we'll get to that in another slide. The other that we've talked about is that if a local government is going to have an impact on the strategic intermodal system facilities, they are required to consult DOT. And the other the big piece of this proportionate share or really any mitigation is that there's this new definition in statute for transportation deficiency. And what it means is that the identified need where the existing and project extent of traffic volume exceeds the level of service standard adopted in the local government comp plan for a transportation facility. What the statute, what used to be concurrency backlog, now the statute provides guidance for these deficiencies, deficiency areas, and sufficiency plans. So as I mentioned earlier, if there is transportation concurrency, the local government must allow the option of proportionate share. And there's no restrictions in the law that can preclude a developer from modifying their existing agreement to take advantage of these changes. And let's see, okay. Before we go back on to that, where things get interesting is that when under the prop share system, facilities that are considered deficient with the additional traffic projected for that development, they're considered to be, let me try that again. Facilities considered deficient with the additional traffic from the development under review are the ones that are considered in the prop share calculation. And the additional trips projected have to go along with that phase of the project. And the facilities that are identified as deficient before the project or before the project will impact them, those improvements necessary to alleviate that previous deficiency are considered to be in place at the time of the proportionate share calculation. I know that's a mouthful, but basically it makes it very difficult to actually fund major improvements unless those deficiencies really are going to be addressed in a previously funded project. And the other little thing here is that in the traffic analysis, any trips assigned to a toll facility are eliminated from the analysis. So I think the short answer is mitigation is an area that we're coming to terms with, and you folks out there on the front lines probably could share a lot more information than what's in the handbook right now. For those municipalities considering an alternative to transportation concurrency, there are other options out there. One of them, mobility fees. It's been in statute for a little while, and those are alternatives. And the idea being that rather than just have an impact fee that finances roadway construction, you can use a mobility fee to finance. You can set up the different parameters for what the mobility fee funds and which areas of your locality. What you can vary the amount of the fee based on where the development's happening within the within specific areas, such as we're showing here in Pasco. So you can use the higher fees to be a disincentive to developing further away from the urbanized area. And they can also utilize tax increment financing and transfer of development rights to spur development and provide incentives. And just in another piece of the mobility plan, this showing where the focus is on premium route improvements for their transit corridor. And as Gary mentioned earlier, the Cutter Mobility Tools Mobility Review Guide does provide some additional tools to measure the benefit of different strategies, looking at corridors and multimodal mitigation. One of the major tools that has been discussed is increasing the network of your area, both not just the roadway network but also your transit network and your bike ped network. Largo, Florida, basically set up a multimodal level of service system within as part of their mobility improvement plan. And based on public input, they assigned different ranks for those categories that they felt were most important in their community. And it wasn't necessarily cost. And some other things from the Mobility Review Guide, providing some options for backage roads and improving the network connectivity. Well, I guess, even though it doesn't say it, this would be a time for questions.
Hey, Martin?
Yes.
We got a question that I think you can answer. What's the difference between fair share mitigation and proportionate share mitigation?
At this point, fair share mitigation doesn't exist, but it used the same process as proportionate share mitigation. And that's what it's called now, except it's for more than DRIs. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
So it really is calculated the same, but the changes in the growth management legislation has really. Which one is the one that's used now? It's called
Proportionate share.
Proportionate share, but it's not that it's any less fair than fair share.
Right.
It's just a different name for the same calculation.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
All right, well, that about wraps it up for us. I guess to conclude, this was only an introduction to the Impact Handbook and multimodal mobility guides and what's new. We plan to have a series of webinars as well as live training in 2015. If you are signed up with FDOT Contact Manager, you'll get notices on how to sign up for these. As you can see, Chapter 2 on the technical aspects of transportation analysis will take to webinar sessions because it is the largest of the chapters. So this slide just lays out the upcoming webinars that we have scheduled. Gary?
So this is important because I know some of you want to keep in touch with us on all the training and documents we do. I'm going to post this poll. We have something called the FDOT Contact Manager, and I'm going to ask you whether you're signed up with it or not.
And if not, we can provide you with instructions on how to once our webinar concludes.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, we have an instruction guide, excuse me, on how to sign up so you get everything about access management and everything about level of service, everything about growth management. And while you're on the website, you'll also find that you can sign up for roadway design and a number of other things that we
pretty much anything that's FDOT related.
Yeah. Okay, we have we'll give it a couple more seconds, and I'm going to close this. And I'm going to share it with you guys. And I am so pleased that the vast majority of you do know, and you're signed up with the DOT Contact Manager. And the good news is that we will send you the link and instructions when we send out this presentation to you. That'll have other links in it also. And we certainly appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to close, hide this poll, and I think we've gone over a number of questions, and I'd like to thank all of you.
Came in.
Yeah, tell me.
How do you determine deficiency if a local government does not have adopted level of service standards? I have no idea. Does anyone else?
We can...
Oops, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just saw that question pop up, and that actually is a very interesting question because the statute actually ties the definition of deficiency to a local government's level of service standard. So the only option is if it's on the state system for the assessment purposes, they could use what's recommended by DOT, but if it's off the system, I don't know what you would use. But just to let you know that it's unfortunately for deficiencies, it's unfortunately tied to the statute that has to be a local government level of service standard.
But we should also point out, like we were discussing yesterday, Janine, that local governments can set their own levels of standard that don't have to be the standard highway capacity manual level of service that we've talked about. Some local governments that went to a level of service F plus 10%, F plus 20%. That is, some local governments have gone that way. But if they do not have a level of service standard, we can hope that when a new development comes in, that their traffic engineers work with them to at least put in their access points to have the least amount of impact.
Yeah, that's true. And when that time comes too, if an amendment comes in regards to that development, they would be required by state law to have a level of service in place, I think, underneath the statute.
Yeah. Okay, thanks
And
to everybody. Yeah, thank you for being here. And with that, appreciate all the people in attendance, and I appreciate everybody who helped put on this presentation. And with that, we will end this webinar. Thank you.